And so we get to the 1970s. The 1970s was a decade where a lot of stuff changed, cinema-wise. Because obviously, in the late 60s, 1969, you had the release of Easy Rider, which kind of changed how cinema was made. So a lot of films weren't necessarily made by a studio. They were more made independently. And that also saw a rise in sort of like independent science fiction in the 1970s. So there's things like Idaho Transfer and The Final Program, these type of movies that were not necessarily big budget studio films, but they were on a smaller budget, not necessarily indie, but they were a lot smaller and they weren't as like grandiose, if you know what I mean. They weren't set by a studio to make a certain amount of money. They were made to tell a story, and that's why the budgets were a lot lower. And the first one from the 1970s is a film based on a novel, like a short novel called The Death of Grass, which was written by John Christopher, who, if you are unaware who John Christopher is, John Christopher also wrote the Tripods stories, which were made into a TV series by the BBC in the early 80s. No Blade of Grass was directed by a man called Cornel Wilde. Cornel Wilde was he was a filmmaker, but also he was an actor who did a lot of stuff in Hollywood during the 1940s and 50s, and became a film director later on in his career. I think he directed a few films earlier as well, but he became more widely known as a film director in the later half of the 60s and the 1970s. Now, No Blade of Grass is essentially a British end of the world catastrophe sort of movie, but it focuses, like most of these type of films do, it focuses on a singular family. The plot concerns a virus that has basically decimated the world's crops, so things like wheat, and what else was there, like rice and stuff like that. So anything that is grown that can be harvested is basically dying, which then causes the end of civilization and chaos and stuff. And it follows a family called Custance family, who's the leader of the Custance family is John Custance, played by Nigel Davenport. He has a patch over his eye, and he's a very stern, very kind of militaristic man, and like quite well off as well. But he sees this come in and decides that he needs to grab his family up sticks and trek across the UK to find a safe haven at his brother's sort of farm, I guess you could say. Nigel Davenport plays John Custance. He is supported by Gene Wallace as Anne Custance, John Hamill as Roger Burnham, and Lynn Fredericks as his daughter Mary Custance. There are also smaller roles for a lot of sort of recognisable people, most notably being Wendy Craig as one of the sort of travellers that they pick up on the way, who may or may not be a bit dodgy, if you know what I mean, mate. But Death of Grass is a really interesting film because it came at a time in the 1970s where like sort of global warming wasn't really an issue. I guess you could think of the atomic testing would have caused some sort of like issue within, when you really think about it, like a climate change way, but it wasn't really a big thing that they were on. And it's an interesting film because it kind of looks at what would happen if all of the grass and all of the wheat and all of the like barley and stuff like that just died and we were unable to harvest them for food. Yeah, like I said, it's a very interesting movie, and what I really like about it is, And this, for some reason, this is what really drives me, or like draws me to this specific subgenre, is the idea of a Britain that is sort of decimated. Not like broken buildings and stuff like that, but when shit goes down, like the breakdown of society. What would we do? How would you survive? Where would you go? Like, who would you choose to take with you? Would you prepare ahead of time, or would you fend for yourself on the roads? This is one of the earliest films that I can remember seeing set in the UK that deals with this sort of prepper scenario. Like I said in the first video, the 60s, 1933 to 1969, when I looked at Panic in Year Zero, a lot of prepper fiction and prepper ideals are sort of there in that movie, and it's sort of the same in this film as well. But yeah, No Blade of Grass is a pretty good film and very much like worth checking out or tracking down if you can find a copy of it. The copy I have is from the Warner Archive collection on DVD, was when they were doing the Burn on Demand, and it's definitely worth getting. I'd love to see a Blu-ray release or a 4K release of this, because it's a film that I didn't really hear about until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when I was doing a little bit of research into seeing if there was any other sort of films set in the UK that dealt with a breakdown in society. But yeah, it's a good film and definitely worth checking out. 1971 gave us probably one of the most famous sort of post-apocalyptic films of the 70s, being the Omega Man, starring Charlton Heston, Anthony Zerber, and Rosalind Cash. It is the second adaptation of Richard Matheson's I Am Legend, which was previously made as The Last Man on Earth. This one goes wide from the actual source material by Richard Matheson, and instead of vampires, this one has mutants, led by Anthony Zerber's Matthias. Charlton Heston plays Robert Neville, who is a scientist who finds that he is immune to a virus that has basically either killed the mass population of the Earth, and the ones who have survived have basically become these sort of mutants who can only go out at night, and when they do go out at night, they like to just burn shit and blow stuff up and just cause mischief and attempt to try and entice Charlton Heston's Robert Neville out of his fortified house and to kill him, basically. And all that changes when he comes across a young boy who has the virus, and he decides to do some tests on him and find a cure that actually works, and lo and behold, he does actually manage to succeed. He then meets Lisa, played by Rosalind Cash, who is sort of the boy's guardian, I guess, and she's with a group of people, and the other one of the other people in the group is a man by the name of Dutch, played by Paul Koslow. It's a good film. It's really good. It's one I saw at quite a young age. My parents kind of allowed me to watch a lot of the 70s sci-fi stuff, especially if it was like Charlton Heston. So I grew up on like Planet of the Apes and the Omega Man and Logan's Run and stuff like that. So yeah, I'd highly recommend checking out the Omega Man. Like I said, it is the second adaptation of I Am Legend, the third being the Will Smith film. And while it does stray massively from the source novel, there's something really, really entertaining about it anyway. And the scenes with at the beginning, with Charlton Heston driving through a sort of deserted Los Angeles, is really, really interesting. Like the opening of the Will Smith version, where he's driving through the deserted remains of New York City. The Los Angeles in this is it's quite eerie when you see a massive city, a well-known city, especially something like Los Angeles or New York or even London. See it so desolate and like empty of of people that it's kind of eerie when you really think about it. But no, the Omega Man is a very cool film, and definitely, again, another one that is definitely worth watching if you've never seen it before. And it's nice to be able to compare the three different versions of I Am Legend, obviously being The Last Man on Earth, the Omega Man, and then I Am Legend from 2005 with Will Smith. But yeah, Omega Man's definitely worth your time. Anthony Zerber's really good as Matthias. He would then play a villain about 16 years later in another post-apocalyptic film, which is the 1987 Patrick Swayze movie Steel Dawn. Charlton Heston is just Charlton Heston. He's great in everything. It was during this time that he was doing this sort of weird sort of trilogy of sci-fi movies. It was started with Planet of the Apes, then it was the Omega Man, then Soylent Green, and there was these it was like the Heston dystopian trilogy. And I know he was in Beneath the Planet of the Apes as well, but I like to think of Planet of the Apes, Omega Man, and Soylent Green as Charlton Heston's dystopian trilogy from the 1960s to the 1970s. So yeah, check out the Omega Man. It's very, very cool. We lead from that into 1974. 1974 gave us the John Borman directed absolute bonkers fest, Zardoz. Zardoz is a science fiction film set in, I think it's the 23rd century, with Sean Connery and Charlotte Rampling. Sean Connery plays a sort of brute known by the name Zed, who is part of a violent society, who finds himself in this sort of complete opposite society, where he meets Charlotte Rampling's Consuela, and she tries to show him that the way that he lives is completely wrong, and peace and love and immortality is the way to go, and the only way to that is by worshipping a gigantic stone head that appears out of nowhere every now and then, called Zardoz. And yeah, it's bonkers. It's absolutely bonkers. I love it. I love Zardoz so much. John Borman wrote did he write it? I think he wrote it and directed it. But it's bonkers. It's the film in which Sean Connery wears basically a red nappy for the entire film. But there's a really cool bit at the end, which is definitely worth checking out. But yeah, Zardoz, absolutely mental movie, just insane. I think actually I may have it, but down here. No, actually, it's on the shelf over there. Yes, it's on the shelf behind me. But yeah, check out Zardoz. It's crazy good fun. Then we get to a sort of like missing film, I guess, in a way. The film is from 1974 as well, but it's a television movie, and it was directed by John Llewellyn Moxey, who was a sort of prolific TV film director or TV director in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, up until I think it was like the early 90s or so. But it's a television movie called Where Have All the People Gone? And it stars Peter Graves, Kathleen Quinlan, and Werner Bloom. And it's about a family who go camping, and something happens while they're inside a cave. I just hit my microphone. While they're inside a cave, and when they come out, they find that the people they were with are now gone and have turned to dust, just like a red dust, a bit like Night of the Comet. If you've ever seen Night of the Comet from 1984, you'll understand what I mean. And then it's basically about following Peter Graves and his family as they leave the mountains where they were vacationing to try and find civilization. And it's not a bad little film, considering it was made for television in 1974, and it's gonna be sort of low budget. Some of the imagery in it is actually quite chilling. There is a version of Where Have All the People Gone on YouTube. In fact, there are multiple versions of Where Have All the People Gone on YouTube. I managed to find one that is somewhat watchable, which I think may have been taken from a DVD that was released by, I want to say, Shriek Show a couple of years ago, that had Where Have All the People Gone and The Ultimate Warrior from 1975. I think. But yeah, if you can find the higher quality version of Where Have All the People Gone, it's definitely worth checking out. And yeah, you'll be pleasantly surprised, considering it's a television movie from 1974, starring the pilot from Airplane and a very young Kathleen Quinlan. Moving on to 1975, we have A Boy and His Dog. Boy and His Dog is a 1975 post-apocalyptic movie directed by L.Q. Jones, who was a very well-known mustachioed actor, which appeared in a lot of westerns and stuff, and later just went on and starred in quite a few films up until his death. And stars Don Johnson, Jason Robards, Susan Benton, and Tim McIntyre as the voice of Blood, who is the dog in the title. And yeah, it's a pretty important film in the pantheon of post-apocalyptic movies. Probably one of the most culty films out there as well. It was available on multiple different DVDs, because I think it was at some point it was like in a public domain or something. I don't know if it was public domain. It couldn't have been, because there's a 70-year thing, a cap on public domain licenses, and but it was released on like a lot of budget DVDs. Like the first time I saw it was on a very, very low budget, like $5.99 DVD that I found at a second-hand shop. But now it's actually released on Blu-ray now. The 1&1 Films have released the Blu-ray. I'd like to see it in 4K, but obviously Blu-ray's pretty good. But A Boy and His Dog is a very, very odd film, and definitely a product of the 1970s, the mid-1970s, and a young Don Johnson too. But yeah, Boy and His Dog. Like, I can't really talk a huge amount about Boy and His Dog, because the stuff in that film has sort of been used and referenced, and basically the themes of that have been used in multiple different films since, so it's quite important, a bit like Night of the Living Dead was important. A Boy and His Dog is also relatively important as well. I was going to say something else. So the film was written and directed by L.Q. Jones, but it was based on the novel by Harlan Ellison. Harlan Ellison is a very well-known science fiction writer, and he wrote the novel on which Boy and His Dog was based. 1975 also saw the release of The Ultimate Warrior, a film I talked about just a second ago when I was talking about Where Have All the People Gone. The film stars Yul Brynner and Max von Sydow, Joanna Miles, and it was written and directed by Robert Klaus, who was responsible for bringing Bruce Lee to the West. He directed Enter the Dragon, and went on and did basically his entire career was in the martial arts sort of genre, because he directed Enter the Dragon, Black Belt Jones with Jim Kelly, China O'Brien, which is the Cynthia Rothrock action movie, and Game of Death, and a whole load of martial arts movies up until like I think it was 1989. And yeah, so Robert Klaus directed a film set in a post-apocalyptic world where Yul Brynner plays a sort of wandering badass who comes across a community headed by Max von Sydow, and they sort of clash a little bit at first, but then he needs him to help protect from basically marauders and stuff. Yul Brynner was far too old to be playing the role he was playing in this movie. He was also... It's kind of like... His role is kind of like an extension of his role in Westworld, which, by and large, was sort of a parody. Not a parody, but sort of like his role in The Magnificent Seven is sort of... I don't want to say parody because it's not the word that I'm looking for, but in Westworld, his homaged. Sorry, there we go. Homaged in Westworld, his black get-up and his black hat. But yeah, Ultimate Warrior is okay. It's not the best. It's hampered by a low budget and a very silent performance by Yul Brynner. But it's worth checking out if you can find like I said, if you can find a decent copy of the Ultimate Warrior, which I think has had a release by Kino Lorber on Blu-ray, maybe 4K. I'm not 100% sure, but if you can find a decent copy of it, I would highly recommend just giving it a shot. It's only like an hour and a half long, and it's an interesting film in the mix of all the other sort of post-apocalyptic craziness of the 1970s. But 1976 brings us to probably my second favourite film from this era and one of my favourite science fiction films. It's Logan's Run, 1976. Stars Michael York, Jenny Agutter, Richard Jordan, Roscoe Lee Brown, Farrah Fawcett, and Peter Ustinov. It's directed by Michael Anderson, who directed the original 1956 version of 1984, George Orwell's dystopian novel, and the Dam Busters, and even did another post-apocalyptic science fiction film in 1989 called Millennium, which I may actually cover in the 1980s section. I'm not 100% sure yet. It's written by David Zella Goodman, based on the 1967 novel Logan's Run by William F. Nolan and George Clayton Johnson. It's sort of remade in like 2005 as The Island with from Michael Bay, because that film shares a hell of a lot of similarities with Logan's Run, but the makers of The Island were actually sued by the makers of the 1979 sci-fi horror movie The Clonus War, or The Clonus Horror, sorry, which bears a lot of similarities to The Island, and before it went to court, DreamWorks actually settled outside. But if you watch The Island and then you watch Logan's Run, there are a lot of similarities towards that film. But I love Logan's Run. Logan's Run is set in a dystopian future, in domed cities, in a massive domed city, where technology is sort of advanced to a certain point, and to prevent overpopulation of these last remaining cities, there is this thing called a carousel, and each person has a little sort of diamond or gem in their hand that when they reach the age of 30, it starts to flash, and they are taken to what is called carousel, and then they are sort of, what's the word for it? They are sent to another plane of existence to extend their life, but in actuality they are killed to keep population down. And Logan, who is a Sandman, basically, he's called Sandman. He is a person who tracks down people who decide to run when it's their time to go to carousel, and his time is actually now. So his hand starts to glow, and so he decides he doesn't want to go to carousel and decides to run, and he runs with the help of Jenny Agutter's Jessica 6, I think it is, and they decide to escape the city and live a life outside. But Logan's former Sandman partner, Francis, is the one who has to track him down. And so it's then basically a chase for the first maybe hour or so of the movie between Logan and Jessica and Francis. But when they finally kind of get out of the whole like dystopian underground domed city scenario thing, they find that the world is essentially a decimated utopia. Basically, it's overgrown. Wildlife is back. They find a library, and inside the library is an old man played by Peter Ustinov, who is somewhat like the last survivor of the previous civilization. It's a really, really good film. I love it. It's very 70s, so there's a lot of reds and greens and blues and every colour of the rainbow. It's very hippie, even though it's from 1976, which, when you think about it, this came out a year before Star Wars, which is the complete opposite of how Logan's Run looks. And also, it bears more sort of, I guess, resemblance to something like 2001: A Space Odyssey in like the production design. Maybe not so much the production design, but the costumes and stuff. It's very much of its time, but it's great. It's fantastic, and the novel's really, really good as well. So that's Logan's Run, 1976. Definitely check out Logan's Run. It is great. I need to get a massive poster of that. Then we get to the film that was meant to compete with Star Wars in 1977. It is a film called Damnation Alley. Stars Jan Michael Vincent, George Peppard, and a very young Jackie Earle Haley. It is about a nuclear war that has basically set the sky on fire, and it's about a group of military men Air Force men. Are they Air Force? I guess they were, because they were the ones in charge of the nuke. Led by George Peppard's character, and they need to find a way to get from where they are in this underground bunker to a place further away. It's basically a road trip. It's a post-apocalyptic road trip that has giant scorpions and Vegas under a bunch of sand. I love the film. I think it's cheesy and just a lot of fun. I think a lot of people actually kind of dislike the movie, and because it came out 2 years before Mad Max came out, and Mad Max sort of gave us that full-on hardcore like collapse of civilization, and Damnation Alley just kind of looks a bit cheap, even though it was made for a hell of a lot more money than Mad Max was. But Damnation Alley is a lot of fun, definitely worth checking out. Like I said, Jan Michael Vincent is in it, as is George Peppard, and yeah, it's good, it's fun. I like it. Wizards, 1977, animated film by Ralph Bakshi. I talked a little bit about Ralph Bakshi on the podcast. That is an odd movie. I'm not going to talk too much about that because I want to do a Ralph Bakshi video at some point. Then we have Dawn of the Dead, my favourite horror film of all time, and the greatest zombie movie ever made. George Romero's 1978 Dawn of the Dead. It's the sequel to Night of the Living Dead. Sort of sequel, I guess. Is it a sequel, or is it like Evil Dead 2, where it's sort of a sequel but also a reboot? Because it takes place during a zombie apocalypse, a lot like Night of the Living Dead, but Night of the Living Dead was made 10 years prior. So I don't know whether or not it's meant to be like a sequel, or if it's like a standalone thing, or like Day of the Dead obviously follows different characters, and Dawn of the Dead follows different characters. Night of the Living Dead follows different characters, same as Land of the Dead, Survival of the Dead, and Diary of the Dead. I should have done Diary and Survival in the opposite rotation. Dawn of the Dead is great. It's about a group of people who basically want to try and get away from the city, from all the zombies and all the violence and chaos that is in the city. One is the female is a television producer. Her boyfriend is the helicopter pilot for the television station, who does like the weather and stuff, I guess. And you've got two SWAT team cops, Peter and do you know what? I've seen this movie a million times. Roger, there we go. Peter and Roger. So you got Peter and Roger, who are the two SWAT members, and then you've got David and Fran, who are the people from the television station. They are friends with Roger, and Roger brings Peter along so they can run, so they can escape. And they go up in the helicopter and they find a shopping centre, an empty mall, and decide to land on the top and sort of break in and see if there's anything worth getting. And they find that it's sort of like everything they need is where they are. And it's a very, very cool movie, and I absolutely love it. I remember seeing Dawn of the Dead for the first time when I was in high school. It was on UK Gold in the UK, and it was round about Halloween. I think it was Halloween night, actually. And I taped it, I recorded it from TV onto VHS, and I watched it. And this was, I believe it was like a TV version of it, like a TV edit. Because when I watched the DVD version for the first time, there were scenes in it that I hadn't seen before, and there were scenes that were removed from the DVD that I saw in the TV version, and then I saw the extended version, and there were even more scenes that were different. And then I watched the Dario Argento cut, which was bizarre. But yeah, I would highly recommend, if you've never seen Dawn of the Dead, watch it, because it's a phenomenal film. Yeah, Dawn of the Dead. I'm not going to go too much into Dawn of the Dead because Dawn of the Dead's incredible. 1979 gave us 4 movies, actually. Robert Altman directed the film Quintet with Paul Newman. It's rubbish. It's a post-apocalyptic sport movie thing. It's not very good. I can understand why it's sort of been buried. Then you've got 1979, you have Ravagers, starring Richard Harris and Ernest Borgnine, another post-apocalyptic movie. Again, it's not very good. And Stalker, 1979, by Andrei Tarkovsky. It's a film that I have never seen, and it's a film that I need to change because I have to watch that at some point. I've seen Solaris, and there was another film he made as well. I can't remember what it's called now, but Stalker is one that's always been on my list. There was a lot, I think it was either in the late 70s or the early 80s, there was a lot of Russian post-apocalypse movies, but I think maybe Radiance or Powerhouse have just, I think it might be Radiance. Radiance have just released a box set of them. I'll have to double check that because I'm not 100% sure. But 1979 rounds off with the GOAT of post-apocalyptic action cinema with Mad Max. George Miller's super low budget, shoot on the weekends, Mel Gibson star-making movie about the collapse of society in Australia and the lawlessness of the roads and revenge. It's amazing. It's so good. If you haven't seen Mad Max, and if you haven't, you should be ashamed of yourself because it's incredible. Max is a cop, and the film opens with a car chase between the MFP, which is the police force, chasing a bandit called the Night Rider, who is high on whatever, and none of them can catch up to him. So it ends up with Max, who is out on the road, to chase this guy down. But while he's doing it, he's talking about while the Knight Rider is being chased, he's screaming and talking about the toe cutter, and it turns out toe cutter is the leader of a biker gang. And when they find out that the Knight Rider was killed in a car accident after being chased by the police, they decide to arrive at the town where Max is a cop and take bloody revenge by running down and murdering his wife and child. And these are the film came out in 1979, so not really that many spoilers. And then the second half of the movie is basically Max taking revenge on the toe cutter in many different violent ways. It's fantastic. It was a film that inspired the movie Saw because of the whole handcuff bit at the end, and it's incredible. The car chases are insanely well shot. The stunt work is insanely well done. There's some really good lines in it, and the dialogue's great. The backstory is really cool. The whole idea of it is just phenomenal. And if it wasn't for that film, we wouldn't have had The Road Warrior, which is coming up in the 1980s, and also Thunderdome and Fury Road and Furiosa. So we've got 1979's Mad Max to thank for being such an incredible movie. I am a huge Mad Max fan, as I've mentioned multiple times, but I just hope you guys want to watch it. So that is the 1970s. I've probably missed a few. I'm not sure. I think I may have got most of them that are specifically post-apocalyptic, but I'm not 100% sure. This was going to be a 2-part video, but I decided to do it in one because Quintet, Ravagers and Stalker are they're not really, apart from Stalker, because I haven't seen Stalker, but I've seen Ravagers and I've seen Quintet. They're not great movies, so I didn't really want to go in a lot into detail. And like I said, with Wizards, I want to do an entire video on Ralph Bakshi stuff at some point, so I'll go into more detail on that one then. So I think I've covered quite a bit of the 1970s. I'll have to double check and see if there is anything that I have missed, but thank you all for watching this. Thanks for watching the previous video. Jesus Christ, that went from like 60 views to, I think it's on 2,000 plus views now, which is insanely good, so thank you very much. I also just wanted to point out about the last video, and a lot of people also pointed this out, is that I missed off on the beach. And there is a reason why I missed off on the beach, because I see On the Beach as more as a military drama than a post-apocalyptic or apocalyptic film. Even though it deals with the fallout of nuclear war, that doesn't really happen until the last 10 minutes or so. And that film is 2.5 hours long, so that is the reason why I left that film out of the Origins video. So I love On the Beach. I think it's a fantastic movie. I also really like the 2000 miniseries remake by Russell Mulcahy, which stars Armand Asante and Brian Brown. Definitely worth checking that out as well. But yeah, that is the reason why I left it off, because I don't necessarily see it as a apocalyptic film. I see it as a military drama that deals with the theme of nuclear war. That's why. But thank you everyone for watching the videos and subscribing and for leaving great comments and stuff. And hope you all enjoy, and I'll see you in the next part, which is the 1980s. So enjoy. Peace. I'm out. Cheers.